How a brand stays relevant. Hey everyone, it's Wolfgang. Branding is in the news. It's very important. So let's talk about branding. Starting with creating a brand. It takes time. It's expensive, can be expensive. You have to establish a budget for it. You can do this in the early days using a very tiny budget if you're consistent with your branding message. And most companies expect 2 to 5 years to establish a brand, 2 to 5 years to get the mind share in the public's consciousness about a new brand. Large companies who spend a lot of money may be able to create a new brand in as little as 6 months. So pharmaceutical companies mostly have the kind of money it takes to be able to do this. 6 months to create a new brand, very aggressive, a lot of advertising. If you listen to AM radio, for example, if you hear a lot of pharma ads, those are pharma companies trying to establish a new brand quickly. They buy a lot of advertising. Okay. Generally, though, assuming it takes 2 to 5 years to establish a brand is reasonable. Coca-Cola in the early days took longer than that, longer than 2 to 5 years, but that's in the ballpark, 2 to 5 years. Okay. So it's worthwhile to create a brand, especially a brand that supports why your customers buy from you. So if you're a company trying to connect people to your products and services, a brand is a good way to make that link so that when people think of, for example, good value, low price, bam, they think of Walmart. If they think of status symbol, high price, they might think of Rolex or Ferrari, For social reasons, Cracker Barrel might have its own brand that draws a specific audience or fails to draw a specific audience if they start rebranding or trying to rebrand. But generally, a brand should support you. First, you've got to know why people are buying from you. And then you create a brand so that when people think of your brand, they automatically will think of all the things they get from that brand. Rolex, Walmart, Cracker Barrel, any brand you can think of. It was established to create a connection to the customer. You want sort of a shortcut for customers to think of you, of what you offer. And that's what a brand does that. So here's a couple ways how to avoid your brand losing relevance. This does happen. Brands, if they are not managed correctly, can start to lose their effect. Okay? For example, the most important thing you should always be aware of is the change in your customer base, because new generations are being created in society, right? The generation of the 80s is different from the generation of the 2000s, is different from the generation of the 2020s. So if you're a brand manager, you have to be cognizant of new generations, not just the generation that the brand has worked for in the past. So you should never fail to connect to the new generation of people, new customers, right? So here's an example of some brands that failed to do this. Have you ever heard of the Catskills or the Borscht Belt? So if you were Jewish in the New England states, you probably heard of that. This was a very established recreational path for people who lived in New England, especially Jews. It basically no longer exists in large part. They did not grab the new generations. So new generations were not attracted. They had an established audience that kept dwindling smaller and smaller, and they forgot to refocus and retarget on the new generations. So it faded. That brand faded. The Catskills resorts, not much left there. It used to be huge. Big band and jazz music. Rock music promoters really took off in the 1960s. With the British invasion, promoting rock music, large arena rock shows took off in the 1960s. Just blew away big band and jazz. It's hard to realize that big band and jazz was ever a thing, but it was for a while. But in the 60s, rock promoters won the game, and they have never lost the game. They keep reinventing rock, new types of rock music, and they fill stadiums. So the target was new audience, always fill stadiums. What kind of rock music do we need to promote to make that happen? Instead, with big band and jazz music, they focus more on the music and less on the audience. Big mistake. Another example, New Coke in 1985. Okay, so there's some debate whether or not this was a strategy that Coke took on in 1985. But in the 1980s, Coke was losing market share to Pepsi. And they did a rebrand in 1985 with New Coke, trying to attract a new audience, a new group of customers. So let's take a look at reviving a brand, because Coke is going to fit into this. Stage a false rebrand. Coke is accused of doing this in the 1980s. 1985, Coke introduced what was called New Coke. It was an attempt to compete with Pepsi, who they were losing market share to. New Coke was sweeter. It was made sweeter because studies supposedly showed that people preferred sweeter cola. So New Coke was introduced in 1985. 90 days later, Old Coke was reintroduced in 90 days, less than 3 months. Very suspicious. It's almost as if the people who were doing branding at Coke wanted to revive the Coke brand. And the way they came up with doing that is a false rebranding, So initially, New Coke had something of an audience, but within 90 days, the old formula, the original Coke formula, was reintroduced to save the Coke brand. Let's look at what happened. In the 1980s, Coke was losing market share to Pepsi. 1985, they staged what a lot of people believe is a false rebranding. Pepsi has now lost market share big time since then. They're down to 8.3%. They were as high as like 15, a little over 15% in the 1980s. They have fallen to 8.3%. Coke has maintained almost all of its market share. Okay, so the strategic rebranding that Coke underwent in 1985, the false rebrand, revived their brand. So this may be a page out of the brand marketing playbook, how to revive a brand that is fading. That is to stage a false rebrand, get people to notice the brand again, then switch back to the original. So Pepsi has not done well. Pepsi has lost almost half their market share. Cracker Barrel is accused of maybe doing the same thing here recently. The restaurant business has been pretty slow for different reasons, but there have been a lot of restaurant chains that have struggled. Some have gone out of business. So there is a question as to whether or not Cracker Barrel's rebrand was a revival of the Cracker Barrel existing brand. So we're trying to figure out how to keep a brand relevant, because as customers change, as conditions in the market change, brands have to adapt. So what has changed in the restaurant business? Sales have sort of collapsed, have fallen. Sales have fallen. So how do we get attention? Because a brand is a shortcut for customers to connect to what you're selling, right? A brand is a placeholder idea in the mind of customers to connect, to be a quick connect from what they're thinking about, what they want, and what they can get from your company. Cracker Barrel stood for something. Restaurant sales have been slow, pretty slow. So a lot of people wonder if Cracker Barrel revived their brand using the Coke approach. And here's why people think that. If you think about how quickly Cracker Barrel reverted back to its original brand, mighty suspicious, mighty fast reversion to its original branding, as if they wanted to create a lot of attention and then remind people what their original brand stood for, and then return the branding, the store look, etc., to the original brand. Because restaurant business has been soft, right? So it's quite possible that Cracker Barrel took a page out of Coke's brand marketing playbook. It worked very well for Coke. Coke has maintained most of their market share. And that says a lot, because the public has switched away from colas, sweetened colas, to diet drinks and teas, and yet Coke has hung in there pretty well. So the main goal of branding is to be a shortcut, to be a stepladder sort of for customers to get from where they are to what you're selling. For Walmart, good value, low price, that's what a customer wants. The Walmart brand makes that connection. That is, if that wasn't there, you would think of any store. With Walmart, with that brand, you automatically think Walmart if you want low price, good value. Same thing with Cracker Barrel. There's a certain appeal, a certain audience that they appeal to. Now they have that audience fighting to get the original brand back, right? So this could have been a strategic rebrand to raise awareness. Okay, so another way to keep a brand relevant, how a brand stays relevant, back in the 70s and 80s, health consciousness was risen. People really started thinking about exercise and diet. Fried foods started getting, they started taking heat in the consumer consciousness. There were a lot of shows about how fried food is bad, etc. So Kentucky Fried Chicken, not good. Fried is part of their brand, Kentucky Fried Chicken. So they switched it to KFC. Now, if you look at all the branding, there's no longer any fried in the branding. However, the original customer base can still figure out, can still make the leap. KFC, Kentucky Fried Chicken, right? So there are ways to, if your brand gets into trouble, you can't just give up on the millions and hundreds of millions or billions spent to establish a brand and all the time it takes to establish a brand. So what a lot of brand marketers will do is they'll try to figure out, can we take the existing brand and coerce it into something or change it into something that's similar enough to something the old customers will recognize, but will also appeal to a new audience? Because the key to not losing relevance is to connect to the new generation, in this case, the new generation of people who are concerned about not wanting to eat any fried foods, right? Wanting to eat healthy foods. So KFC started offering more than just fried chicken at the same time. So KFC stood for more than fried chicken in terms of what they sold for food in their restaurants. So Kentucky Fried Chicken was dropped in the brand, but they sort of kept the old brand, but they kept the initials only. So they kept the old audience, they attracted the new audience. So that is the key thing about keeping your brand relevant. You've got an existing customer base, but you have a new coming up customer base you've got to stay aware of and you've got to appeal to. These guys, the Catskills Resorts, they're gone. They failed to do that. Big band and jazz music, they were very popular in their day, but they did not nail the arena shows, the huge audiences, the rock promotion. They did not nail the promotion. So they catered to an older audience that slowly died off. Rock music has continually reinvented itself. It has always sought big promotion, large shows, and what form of rock music do we need to appeal to the existing audience, the new generation? Kentucky Fried Chicken did it by changing and moving away from fried. So I couldn't fit everything on the board. So why branding is a good idea? Number one, it creates credibility for the company. If you're long enough, if you stay in the game long enough to establish a brand, you've established some trust. You built some trust. A recognized brand is also a defense against competitors. For example, if you think of good value and low price, if Walmart wasn't there, if you only thought as a customer of, I want a good value and a low price, you would go anywhere. With Walmart, that's the first thing you think of. So you will go to Walmart before you'll go to a new competitor, right? So branding, by the way, branding is important. It's not the only part of the marketing message. I mean, the marketing message, marketing in general, is designed to make people curious to some degree about what you're trying to sell, about what you have. Branding is something that is a placeholder in the customer's mind. It's the mind share of what your company represents. For Walmart, it's good value and low price. Marketing in general is a little broader. So branding is not all of marketing. It's just a part of it. It's a very important part of it. So for example, if you were thinking about buying a new car, right? And you wanted something that was an Asian-built vehicle that had enough features. It didn't have to be a luxury car, but it had to be a decent car. You had two choices. Which of these choices would you prefer? Toyota or Dongfeng, D-O-N-G-F-E-N-G. Dongfeng, they do pretty well in China. China's a huge country. Dongfeng does pretty well in China. They're nothing compared to Toyota. They have no mind share. They have no branding. So branding, when you think Asian, probably a good quality car, doesn't have to be too luxurious, just a decent vehicle for transportation. Toyota is going to win that almost every time. Very few people are going to say, no, I want a Dongfeng. It's not an established brand. So establishing a brand, making it relevant, keeping it relevant, it can be a great defense against new competitors. Will Dongfeng ever sell the kind of numbers of cars in the U.S. that Toyota does? Not in our lifetime, for a lot of reasons. But they're not even allowed into this market. People are aware of them, especially if they've been to Europe. But in general, the brand is extremely valuable. It does have a value associated with it. If you thought of investing and you wanted to make an investment in a holding company, you might think of Berkshire Hathaway. But there are a lot of holding companies out there you've never heard of and you will probably never invest in, right? So if you have any questions about branding or marketing, I've got a background in business. I do have a degree in business. Please ask any questions that you have in the comments. I'll try to answer them. And I really want to thank everyone for watching and have a great day.